It was my shortest married life because she fucked her ex 9 months ago. So, here I am, writing a post I never thought I'd write. I guess I just need to get this out of my system because my whole life feels like it's flipped upside down. My name's Jake, and I've been married to Emily for 3 years. We've been together for 5 total, and honestly, I thought we were one of those gold standard couples, solid, happy, and ready to take on the world. Or at least, that's what I told myself. We got engaged about a year into dating. It was a whirlwind romance, passionate, full of late-night talks and dreams about the future. She was everything I'd ever wanted, smart, funny, and beautiful in that girl-next-door way that makes you feel like you've hit the jackpot. So, I didn't hesitate when I asked her to marry me. And when she said yes, it felt like all the pieces of my life had fallen perfectly into place. But lately, things have been weird. Emily's always had a fiery personality, but recently, it's like she's on a short fuse 24/7. She's snappier, colder, and there's this emotional wall between us that wasn't there before. I chalked it up to stress. She's got a demanding job, and we've been talking about starting a family, which I know can be overwhelming. But there's a difference between stress and whatever this is. The first real sign that something was wrong came last month when she suddenly became obsessed with her appearance. Emily's always been pretty low-key, a jeans and hoodie kind of girl. But now, she's wearing makeup every day, spending hours in front of the mirror, and buying expensive clothes that don't feel like her. I asked her about it, jokingly at first, and she just rolled her eyes and said, "What? A girl can't feel good about herself?" Fair enough, I thought. But then she started coming home late. A lot. She'd say she was out with friends or working overtime, but something about it didn't sit right with me. I asked her if everything was okay, and she got defensive, saying I was acting controlling and insecure. That stung. I didn't want to be that guy, the jealous husband who smothers his wife, but my gut was telling me something was off. Last Tuesday was when the crack turned into a full-blown fissure. Emily had gone out for drinks with the girls, which wasn't unusual. But when I called her around 10 p.m. to check in, she didn't answer. I didn't hear from her until she came stumbling through the door at 1 a.m., her hair a mess and her phone clutched tightly in her hand. "Had fun?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light, but she just muttered something about being tired and went straight to bed. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. And then, as she tossed her coat onto the chair, her phone slipped out of her pocket and landed on the floor. That's when I saw it. A text from someone named Mason. "Mason, I can't stop thinking about you. Tonight was perfect." And just like that, my heart dropped into my stomach. I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity, trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. Maybe Mason was a coworker. Maybe this was all a misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew something was very, very wrong. When Emily woke up the next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek, made coffee, and chatted about her plans for the day like everything was perfectly normal. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but I couldn't find the words. Instead, I kept quiet, my mind racing with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answers to. And then, as I stood there watching her sip her coffee, she smiled at me, this forced, almost practiced smile that felt fake. That's when it hit me. The woman sitting across from me wasn't the Emily I thought I knew, and I had no idea what I was going to do about it. Later that day, while Emily was in the shower, her phone buzzed again. I grabbed it without thinking, my hands shaking as I unlocked it. What I found wasn't just a confirmation. It was a bombshell that I stared at her phone, my hands trembling like I'd just downed 5 cups of coffee. The screen lit up with another message from Mason. "Mason, can't wait to see you again, baby. Let's make a JVUSTS next time. No distractions." My stomach twisted into knots. Baby, no distractions? What the hell was going on? My first thought was to throw the phone at the wall, or maybe confront Emily right then and there, but something stopped me. Instead, I scrolled up. What I found made my blood run cold. The messages stretched back weeks, maybe even months. Flirty texts, inside jokes, and plans to meet up. They talked about restaurants, hotels, and places I'd never even heard of. He sent her selfies. This guy with the kind of smarmy, cocky grin that makes you want to punch your screen. And Emily? She was eating it up. She called him handsome. She said she couldn't stop thinking about him. She sent pictures, Nothing scandalous, thank God, but pictures she'd never sent me. And then there was a text that hit me like a freight train. Emily. I told him it's his, but I still can't believe it's actually yours. I froze. What the hell? It's his? What's his? My brain went into overdrive, piecing things together in a panic. She couldn't be talking about. No, that was impossible. We weren't even pregnant. At least I didn't think we were. Emily had never said anything. But then I remember the last time she was sick, curled up on the couch with saltines and ginger ale. She'd said it was the flu, and I hadn't questioned it. I locked the phone and shoved it back where I found it just as I heard the water shut off. My heart was pounding so loudly, I was sure she could hear it from the bathroom. Emily walked into the room a few minutes later, her hair wrapped in a towel, humming to herself. She glanced at me, her expression unreadable, and said, "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a smile. "Yeah, just thinking about work stuff." She shrugged and went about her morning like nothing was wrong, but I couldn't shake the thought. Was she pregnant? And if she was, whose baby was it? That evening, while Emily was out running errands, I got a call from an unknown number. When I picked up, a man's voice said, "Hey, Jake, we need to talk about Emily." The voice on the other end of the line was low and steady, with just a hint of tension beneath the surface. "Jake, you there?" I gripped my phone like it might slip out of my hand. "Who is this?" "It's Mason," he said, like that name wasn't already tattooed in my brain. "We need to talk." My head spun. Mason, the guy from the texts. The guy I'd been mentally tearing apart all day. I didn't even know what to say. Was this some kind of sick joke? "What the hell do you want?" I finally managed to spit out. There was a pause on his end, followed by a deep sigh. "Look, I don't want to do this over the phone. Can we meet somewhere? I think you deserve to hear the truth." The truth? My fists clenched so hard my knuckles popped. I wanted to scream at him, to demand answers right then and there. But a small, rational part of me whispered, "You need to know. All of it." "Fine," I said through gritted teeth. "Where?" He suggested a coffee shop on the other side of town, somewhere low-key and out of the way. The fact that he even had a plan made my skin crawl. Was this guy really so comfortable with sneaking around that he had a list of neutral meeting spots? I agreed to meet him in an hour and hung up without saying goodbye. My hands were shaking, my mind racing. Should I even go? Was this some kind of trap? What if he was just trying to mess with me? But the need for answers overpowered my doubts. If Mason thought he could get one over on me, he had another thing coming. When I arrived at the coffee shop, Mason was already there, sitting at a corner table with his phone in one hand and a latte in the other. He looked just as smug as I imagined. Dark hair, sharp jawline, wearing a leather jacket that screamed wannabe bad boy. He spotted me the second I walked in, raising a hand like we were old friends. I didn't smile. I didn't wave back. I walked straight to the table and sat down, keeping my expression as cold as I felt inside. "Start talking." Mason set his phone down and leaned back in his chair, studying me for a moment. "All right," he said, his voice calm. "First, I want to say I didn't mean for things to get this far." My jaw tightened. "Cut the crap. Just tell me what's going on." He nodded, like he'd been expecting that. "Okay, fine. Emily and we've been seeing each other for about 6 months. 6 months. My stomach dropped. That was almost half of our marriage. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to keep my voice steady. "And the baby?" I asked, my throat dry. Mason hesitated, his confident facade cracking for the first time. "It's mine. She told me she was going to tell you eventually, but I guess things got complicated." "Complicated?" I hissed, my voice rising. Heads turned, and I lowered my tone, leaning in. "You sleep with my wife, get her pregnant, and then you call me to what? Clear your conscience." "No," he said quickly. "Look, I get it, okay? I screwed up. We both did. But this isn't just about me and Emily anymore. There's a kid involved. My kid. And I'm not going to just disappear." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. My mind flashed to all the moments Emily had talked about starting a family, about how excited she was for us to have kids someday. And now, she was pregnant with someone else's child? I stared at Mason, barely able to contain the rage boiling inside me. "So, what do you want from me?" I asked, my voice shaking with fury. "You want my blessing?" You want me to step aside so you can play house with her? No, Mason said firmly. I want to do what's right for the baby. And whether you like it or not, that means we all have to figure this out together. Together. The word made me want to laugh, but there was nothing funny about this situation. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. You've got some nerve, Mason. Call me like this. Sitting here like you're the good guy. You think you're some kind of hero because you want to do what's right? You don't even know what that means. He opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't give him the chance. I walked out of the coffee shop, my hands shaking, my chest tight with anger and betrayal. I couldn't do this. Not now. Not with him. When I got home, Emily was waiting for me, her face pale and her eyes wide. We need to talk, she said, her voice trembling. There's something you don't know. I stood in the doorway, staring at Emily as she sat on the couch, her hands nervously wringing a throw pillow. The sight of her, so small, so seemingly fragile, almost made me hesitate. Almost. But then I remembered Mason's words from the coffee shop. The baby is mine. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me with more force than I intended. Yeah, Emily, we do need to talk. Her eyes darted to me, wide and scared, like a kid caught stealing. Jake, she started, her voice trembling. Before you say anything, just let me explain. I folded my arms, keeping my distance. Oh, I'm dying to hear this. She hesitated, chewing on her bottom lip like she was stalling for time. I've been meaning to tell you. Tell me what? I snapped, cutting her off. That you've been sneaking around with Mason for 6 months? That you're pregnant with his kid? What exactly were you planning to say? Emily. Her face went pale, and the pillow slipped from her grip, falling to the floor. You know, she whispered. Yeah, I know, I said, my voice dripping with anger. I had the pleasure of hearing it straight from him. Mason called me Emily. He told me everything. She flinched, her eyes filling with tears. Jake, don't. I growled, holding up a hand to stop her. Don't you dare try to spin this. Just tell me the truth for once in your life. Emily wiped her eyes, her shoulders shaking. For a moment, I thought she was about to break down completely. But then, she took a deep breath and looked up at me with a mix of guilt and defiance. Fine, she said, her voice steadier than before. Yes, I've been seeing Mason. And yes, the baby is his. Hearing her admit it out loud was like a punch to the chest. I stumbled back a step, my head spinning. It was one thing to suspect, to piece things together in my head. But hearing her say it, own it, felt like my world was collapsing all over again. Why? I asked, my voice cracking. Why would you do this to me? To us? Emily looked down, her hands twisting together in her lap. I don't know, Jake, she said softly. It just happened. It just happened, I repeated, my voice rising. You don't just happen to cheat on your husband and get pregnant by someone else. Emily, you made choices. You lied. You betrayed me. She flinched again, her tears spilling over. I know I messed up, okay? I know I hurt you, but things haven't been the same between us for a long time. I let out a bitter laugh. Oh, so now this is my fault? Because I've been too busy working to keep a roof over our heads? Because I trusted you to be honest with me? It's not about blame, she said, her voice desperate. It's about how disconnected we've been. You've been so focused on work, Jake. I felt invisible. I stared at her, my jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. Invisible? You think that justifies this? You could have talked to me, Emily. You could have told me how you felt instead of running to Mason. I didn't plan for this to happen, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't wake up one day and decide to ruin everything. I was lonely, Jake. And Mason, he was there. And now what? I demanded. You think you and Mason are going to ride off into the sunset with your perfect little family? Is that it? No, she said, shaking her head vehemently. I don't even know what I want anymore. All I know is that I screwed up, and I don't know how to fix it. Her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my future, it was all gone. And then she dropped the second bombshell. There's one more thing, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I froze, my pulse hammering in my ears. What could possibly be worse than what you've already told me? Emily hesitated, her eyes darting to the floor. Mason doesn't know the whole truth, she said, her voice trembling. The baby, it might not be his. The room spun. What the hell are you talking about? I demanded. She finally looked up at me, her face pale and tear-streaked. It could be yours, Jake, she said, her voice cracking. I don't know who the father is. Before I could respond, Emily's phone buzzed on the coffee table. We both looked down at the screen, and my stomach dropped when I saw the name. It wasn't Mason this time. It was someone else. The phone buzzed again, the name on the screen glowing in the dim light of the living room. Ethan. My stomach clenched. Ethan? Who the hell was Ethan? Emily froze, her wide eyes darting between the phone and me. Panic etched all over her face. I could feel my anger bubbling over, threatening to erupt. Who's Ethan? I asked, my voice low but shaking with barely contained rage. She didn't answer. Instead, she lunged for the phone, but I was faster. I grabbed it before she could, holding it just out of her reach. Don't even think about it, I said, my voice icy. You're going to tell me right now who this guy is. Jake, please, she said, her voice desperate. It's not what you think. Oh, really? I said, scrolling through her phone. My hands were trembling, but I didn't stop. I pulled up the messages with Ethan, my heart sinking further with every line. There was more text, just as flirty, just as incriminating. Plans to meet up, compliments, inside jokes. One message from him read, "Can't wait to see you again. Last time was amazing." Another one, from just 2 days ago, said, "I miss you already. You're worth the risk." Not what I think, I said, holding the phone up. So what is it, Emily? Because this looks a whole lot like you got a third guy in this mess. Emily collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I didn't mean for you to find out like this, she said, her voice muffled. It's complicated. Complicated? I barked, pacing the room. Oh, I'll bet it's complicated. What? Are we going to flip a coin to figure out who the father is? Or are there more names I should know about? No, she cried, looking up at me, her face streaked with tears. There's no one else. It's just Mason and Ethan. But it's not what it looks like. I let out a bitter laugh. You keep saying that, Emily, but it always looks like exactly what it is. So why don't you just admit it? You've been lying to me this whole time. About everything. She started sobbing, shaking her head. I don't know how it got this bad, she whispered. I never meant to hurt you. Well, congratulations, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. You've managed to screw me over better than I ever thought possible. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The room was heavy with silence, the weight of everything pressing down on me like a ton of bricks. I felt like I was drowning in it, in the lies, the betrayal, the sheer absurdity of it all. Finally, I broke the silence. You need to tell me everything, I said, my voice low but firm. No more lies. No more half-truths. I want to know exactly what's been going on. Emily hesitated, wiping her eyes. Ethan was someone I met through work, she said quietly. It started as nothing, just friendly conversations. But then one night, after a work event, things got out of hand. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. And Mason? I asked, where does he fit into this circus? I met him after, she admitted, her voice barely audible. It wasn't serious at first. I didn't think it would turn into anything. But then I found out I was pregnant, and everything spiraled out of control. I stared at her, my head spinning. So let me get this straight, I said. You've been seeing 2 different guys behind my back. You're pregnant. And now you're telling me you don't even know who the father is? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know it sounds horrible. I've been so lost, Jake. I didn't know how to stop. I shook my head, backing away from her. You didn't know how to stop? You didn't even try. You've been lying to me for months, Emily. And now you're dragging me into this mess. Expecting me to what? Be okay with it? Stick around while you figure out who the lucky winner is? No, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't expect anything from you. I didn't want it to end like this. Her words hung in the air, but they felt hollow, meaningless. I had nothing left to say. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the house, slamming the door behind me. As I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel and trying to breathe through the storm raging in my chest. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Mason. "We need to meet. I just found something out, and it changes everything." I sat there in my car, staring at Mason's text like it was a ticking time bomb. "We need to meet. I just found something out, and it changes everything." The nerve of this guy. After everything he'd done, he thought he could just text me like we were buddies? My thumb hovered over the reply button. Part of me wanted to ignore him, to drive away and leave this whole mess behind. But another part, probably the same part that couldn't stop picking at a scab, needed to know what he meant. What could Mason possibly have found out that would make any of this worse? Before I could overthink it, I replied, "Where?" 20 minutes later, I found myself in the parking lot of some dingy dive bar Mason had picked. It was the kind of place where the neon signs buzzed and half the patrons looked like they'd lived there for decades. Fitting, I thought. It matched the dumpster fire that my life had become. Mason was already inside, sitting at a corner table with a half-empty beer in front of him. When he saw me walk in, he raised his hand in a stiff wave. I didn't wave back. "What do you want, Mason?" I said as I approached, keeping my voice low enough not to draw attention. "I'm not here to play games." He gestured to the seat across from him. "Just sit, please." I hesitated, then reluctantly sat down. "You've got 5 minutes." Mason sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. He looked different this time, less smug, more nervous. "Good. He should be nervous." "Okay," he said, leaning forward. "I wasn't going to tell you this, but after what Emily told me today, I felt like you needed to know." "Spit it out," I snapped. "She lied to me too," Mason said, his voice low. "About the baby. She told me it was mine, but I'm not so sure anymore." My stomach churned. "What are you talking about?" Mason pulled out his phone and slid it across the table. On the screen was a series of texts between him and Emily. "Emily, I don't know how to tell Jake." Mason, "You mean about us?" "Emily, no. About Ethan." My head spun. Ethan again. This wasn't just some random side fling. He was in the thick of it too. "I thought it was just me," Mason continued, his voice tight. "I thought I was the only one she was seeing. But when I asked her about the timeline, things didn't add up. She admitted there was someone else." "And you're just now figuring this out?" I said, my voice dripping with disbelief. "She's been lying to both of us, Mason. Congratulations. You're not special." He flinched but nodded. "Yeah, well, it gets worse." My stomach sank. "Worse than this circus." "She mentioned something about Ethan wanting to take responsibility," Mason said, leaning in closer. "I think he knows about the baby. And if he does, that means he's going to get involved." I let out a bitter laugh. "Great. Let's just add him to the roster. Maybe we can all take turns raising the kid." "I'm serious, Jake," Mason said, his voice firm. "If Ethan's in the picture, things could get messy. Legally messy." I frowned, my jaw tightening. "What do you mean?" Mason hesitated, like he was debating whether to say more. Then he leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "Ethan's got money. A lot of it. If he decides to fight for custody or gets the courts involved, you could end up caught in the crossfire." "Why would I get caught up in this?" I demanded. "It's not my kid." "Are you sure?" Mason shot back. "Because Emily isn't. And if she puts your name on the birth certificate." The thought hit me like a punch to the gut. He was right. If Emily named me as the father, whether out of guilt, convenience, or some twisted sense of loyalty, I could be legally responsible for a child that wasn't mine. And if Ethan wanted to fight that, it could turn into a nightmare. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice low. "What's in it for you?" Mason shrugged, looking genuinely defeated. "Because I'm tired of the lies. Emily played me just like she played you. I thought I knew what I was getting into, but I didn't. And now, I don't know what to do." For a moment, I almost felt bad for him. Almost. But then I remembered who he was and what he'd done, and any shred of sympathy evaporated. "I'll tell you what to do," I said, standing up. "Stay the hell out of my life." Mason opened his mouth to protest, but I didn't give him the chance. I walked out of the bar, leaving him sitting there with his guilt and his half-empty beer. When I got home, there was a car parked in the driveway that I didn't recognize. My heart sank as I walked inside to find Emily sitting on the couch, with Ethan that I stood frozen in the doorway, the scene in front of me feeling like some kind of twisted fever dream. Emily sat on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her face pale and drawn. And next to her in my house sat Ethan. He was everything I expected and more, tall, polished, the kind of guy who looked like he stepped out of a business magazine. Dark suit, expensive watch, perfectly styled hair. He had this calm, confident air about him that immediately made my blood boil. "Jake," Emily said, her voice shaky. Save it." I cut her off, my gaze locked on Ethan. "Who the hell are you? And why are you in my house?" Ethan stood, extending a hand like we were meeting at a networking event. "Ethan Cole, I think we need to talk." I didn't take his hand. "Oh, you think so, huh? Did Mason send you? Or do you and Emily have your own secret schedule?" Ethan's jaw tightened, and he pulled his hand back, slipping it into his pocket instead. "I understand this is a difficult situation. No, interrupta, stop incluse. You don't understand anything. You don't know me, and you don't know what the hell is going on here." Emily stood quickly, stepping between us. "Jake, please," she said, her voice trembling. "Just hear him out. He didn't come here to cause trouble." "Trouble?" I barked out a bitter laugh. "Emily, this entire thing is trouble. Don't you dare try to downplay this." Ethan held up his hands, palms out, like he was trying to calm a raging bull. "Look, I don't want to fight with you. I just want to clear the air." I glared at him, my fists clenching at my sides. "Fine, you got 2 minutes. Start talking." Ethan nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "Emily told me everything. About the pregnancy, about Mason, about you. I didn't know she was married when we started seeing each other." "Oh, so that makes it better?" I snapped. "You're still part of this disaster, whether you knew or not." "I understand that," he said, his voice calm. "But what's important now is the baby. If it's mine, I want to be involved. I have a right to be involved." The sheer audacity of this guy was almost laughable. "Involved?" I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You waltz in here, drop this bombshell on me, and now you want to play Father of the Year?" Ethan's calm facade cracked slightly, his eyes narrowing. "I'm not here to fight with you, Jake. I'm here because I care about Emily and the child she's carrying." "Caring about Emily hasn't exactly worked out for me," I shot back. "So forgive me if I don't take your concern at face value." Emily stepped forward, her voice breaking as she pleaded, "Jake, please. Can we all just talk? Figure this out like adults?" "Adults?" I turned to her, incredulous. "You're kidding, right? This whole mess is because you couldn't act like an adult in the first place." Her face crumpled, and she sank back onto the couch, tears streaming down her face. Ethan moved as if to comfort her, but I stepped in his path, glaring at him. "Don't," I said coldly. "Not in my house." Ethan paused, his eyes searching mine. "I'm not trying to take anything away from you, Jake. But if the baby is mine, I have a responsibility. And if it's not?" I demanded, my voice rising. "What then, Ethan? You just go back to your fancy life and pretend this never happened?" He didn't answer right away. His silence spoke volumes, and it only fueled my anger. "This is insane," I said, running a hand through my hair. "You both sit here, dropping bombshell after bombshell on me, and I'm supposed to just what? Shake your hand and say, 'Good luck with the baby'?" "No one's asking you to do that," Ethan said, his tone measured. "But we need to figure out what's best for the child." "And what about me?" I snapped, my voice cracking under the weight of everything. "What about the life you've destroyed? Or does that not matter because you're playing noble dad now?" Emily broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. Ethan glanced at her, then back at me, his expression unreadable. For the first time, he seemed at a loss for words. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice low and steady. "You're both going to leave my house. Now, I need space to figure out how to deal with this nightmare." "Jake," Emily started, but I cut her off with a sharp glare. "Go, Emily," I said firmly. "Take Ethan with you." Ethan hesitated, like he wanted to say more, but something in my expression must have told him not to push his luck. He nodded once, then gently touched Emily's arm. "Let's go," he said quietly. She looked up at me, her tear-streaked face full of regret. But I didn't care. I turned away as they left, the door clicking shut behind them. Just as I sat down, trying to process the chaos, my phone buzzed again. It was a text from Emily. "I know you're angry, but there's something I didn't tell you. You need to know the truth about Ethan." I stared at the text, my stomach twisting into knots. "You need to know the truth about Ethan." Great. More truth. Just what I needed, because apparently everything I'd been told so far wasn't enough of a train wreck. I didn't reply right away. I sat there, gripping my phone so hard my knuckles turned white, debating whether I even wanted to know what Emily had to say. But no matter how much I wanted to ignore her, that gnawing curiosity, the same one that had kept me digging through her lies in the first place, got the better of me. "What now?" I typed back, hitting send before I could overthink it. Her reply came almost instantly. "Please let me come back so we can talk. I'll explain everything." I groaned, rubbing my temples. My head was already pounding from everything that had happened, and the last thing I wanted was another confrontation. But if there was more to the story, and at this point, how could there not be? I needed to hear it. "Fine," he replied. "Come alone. And this better be the last secret." Emily showed up half an hour later, looking like she'd been through the ringer. Her face was pale, her eyes red and swollen, and she clutched her purse like it was some kind of lifeline. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pity for her. But then I remembered the lies, the cheating, the chaos she dragged me into, and that pity vanished. "Talk," I said, crossing my arms as I leaned against the kitchen counter. "What's the truth about Ethan?" She hesitated, glancing down at the floor like a kid about to confess to breaking a vase. "He's not just some random guy I met through work," she said quietly. "I've known him for years." That caught me off guard. "Years?" I repeated. "How many years?" She swallowed hard, finally meeting my gaze. "He's my ex-boyfriend. We dated in college." My head jerked back as if she'd slapped me. "You're kidding me," I said, my voice dripping with disbelief. "So, you didn't just cheat on me. You cheated on me with your ex? And you didn't think that was relevant information to share before now?" "I didn't think it mattered," she said, her voice cracking. "I wasn't planning on anything happening with him. I ran into him at a conference, and it spiraled." "Oh, sure," I said bitterly. "It just spiraled. How convenient." Her hands flew up in frustration. "Jake, I know I messed up, okay? I know I've hurt you, but I'm trying to be honest now." "Honest? Now?" I shook my head, laughing bitterly. "You've been lying to me for months, Emily. Months. And now you want credit for finally telling the truth? Are you kidding me?" She looked like she was on the verge of tears again, but I didn't care. I wasn't about to let her play the victim. Not this time. "Why didn't you tell me about him before?" I demanded. "When you ran into him, why didn't you just tell me?" "I don't know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe because I was scared. Scared you'd get jealous. Scared I'd what?" I snapped. "Be angry?" "Yeah. No kidding." I'd have been furious, but at least I wouldn't have found out like this. She flinched, her shoulders sagging. "I didn't mean for it to get this far. I thought I could keep it under control, but what?" I pressed. "You couldn't resist him? He said all the right things, and you just forgot about your husband?" Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. "I don't know how to explain it," she sobbed. "I felt like I was drowning, Jake. And Ethan was familiar. He made me feel like I wasn't invisible. Invisible." There it was again, the same excuse she'd given me before. It hit differently this time, though, knowing that the man who'd made her feel seen was someone she'd once loved. Someone who clearly still had a hold on her. "You're unbelievable," I said, my voice low and cold. "You don't get to blame this on me. I didn't push you to him, Emily. You chose this." "I know," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I know I messed up, Jake. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just thought you deserved to know the truth." "Deserve to know?" I barked out a harsh laugh. "What about what I deserve, period? Like a wife who doesn't lie to me? A marriage that isn't built on betrayal?" She had no answer for that. She just stood there, crying quietly, her guilt written all over her face. For a long moment, the room was silent, the weight of everything hanging heavy in the air. Finally, I shook my head and stepped back, putting some distance between us. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this," I said, my voice hollow. "I don't even know who you are anymore." "Jake," she started, but but I held up a hand to stop her. Just go, I said. I need time to think. Her face crumpled, but she didn't argue. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, pausing just long enough to say, I'm sorry, Jake. I really am. Then she was gone, leaving me alone with the chaos she'd unleashed. Later that night, as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Emily. It was Ethan. His message was short and to the point. We need to talk. It's about the baby. The buzz of my phone echoed in the silent room, and my chest tightened when I saw Ethan's name on the screen. His message was simple but loaded. We need to talk. It's about the baby. My first instinct was to throw the phone across the room. What more could he possibly have to say? Was this some kind of game to him? But curiosity, or maybe some twisted need to understand, got the better of me. I replied, What now? The 3 little dots popped up almost immediately, showing he was typing. His response came quickly. This isn't something I can explain over text. Meet me tomorrow at noon. I'll send the address. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to ignore him, to let him stew in whatever mess he was trying to drag me into. But another part of me knew I needed answers. If this was about the baby, I couldn't afford to ignore it. The next day, I drove to the address Ethan sent me. It turned out to be a park on the outskirts of town, quiet and almost eerily peaceful. He was already there, leaning against his sleek black car, looking like he belonged in a magazine spread instead of my screwed-up life. He straightened up when he saw me, his expression serious. Thanks for coming, he said. Cut the small talk, I said flatly, crossing my arms. What do you want? Ethan nodded, as if expecting my hostility. Fair enough. Look, I've been thinking about everything that's happened. The baby, Emily, you, and I realized there's something you need to know. Spit it out, I said, not in the mood for another round of his dramatic pauses. He took a deep breath, his confidence faltering just slightly. I don't think the baby is mine, he said. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him right. What? I know how this looks, Ethan said quickly, holding up a hand. But after talking to Emily, I started doing the math. The timing doesn't add up. If she's as far along as she says, it couldn't be mine. The words hit me like a ton of bricks. So, what are you saying? That it's my kid. It's possible, he said carefully. Or it could be Mason's. But it's not mine. I'm sure of that. I let out a bitter laugh, the absurdity of the situation hitting me all at once. You're sure? Really? Because no one in this disaster seems to be sure of anything. I know it's hard to believe, Ethan said, his voice steady but earnest. But I didn't come here to mess with you. I came here because I thought you deserved to know. Deserve to know? I repeated, my voice rising. Do you people hear yourselves? Every time one of you screws up, you act like you're doing me a favor by telling me half the truth. Ethan didn't flinch. I can't undo what's already happened, Jake. But if there's a chance the baby's yours, you need to prepare for that. And what if it's Mason's? I shot back. What then? You just get to walk away from this clean? I'm not walking away, he said firmly. If it's mine, or even if it's not, I'm not going to abandon Emily or the baby. But I'm not going to stand here and pretend it's my responsibility if it isn't. The arrogance in his tone made my fists clench. I wanted to punch him, to wipe that self-righteous look off his face. But deep down, I knew he wasn't entirely wrong. The baby might not be his. Hell, it might not be mine either. The only thing I knew for sure was that this nightmare was far from over. Do you even care about her? I asked, my voice sharp. Or is this just about saving face for you? Ethan's jaw tightened. Of course I care about her, he said. But this isn't about me or you. It's about the child. Whoever the father is, we owe it to the baby to get this sorted out. I stared at him, my chest heaving with barely contained rage. I don't owe you anything, Ethan. Not you, not Mason, and right now, not even Emily. But if that baby is mine, I trailed off, my voice faltering as the weight of the situation finally hit me. If the baby was mine, everything would change. Everything. Ethan nodded, his expression softening slightly. You should get a paternity test, he said quietly. The sooner, the better. And if it's yours? I asked, my voice dripping with venom. Then I'll step up, he said simply. But until we know, there's no point in tearing each other apart. I clenched my fists, struggling to rein in the storm of emotions swirling inside me. Fine, I said through gritted teeth. But don't think for a second this makes you the good guy. Ethan nodded, accepting the jab without argument. I'll be in touch, he said, then turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the quiet park. That evening, Emily called. Her voice was shaky, almost panicked. Jake, she said, there's something you need to know before we do a paternity test. It's about Mason. Emily's voice on the phone was trembling, barely holding itself together. Jake, she said, before we go any further, there's something I need to tell you. It's about Mason. Of course, it was about Mason. Why wouldn't it be? At this point, it felt like every twist and turn in this nightmare led right back to him. What about him? I asked, my voice flat. I didn't even have the energy to be angry anymore. Emily hesitated, and I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. He's been lying to both of us. I laughed bitterly. That's rich, coming from you. What's he lying about? Is he not really Mason? Did he fake his whole identity? Go on, Emily surprised me. It's not like that, she said quickly. Jake, he doesn't know about the baby. The words hit me like a slap. What do you mean he doesn't know? You told him it was his. He's the one who called me, Emily. He's been trying to step up, or whatever crap he's telling himself. I lied, she admitted, her voice small and broken. I told him it was his because I thought it would be easier. Easier? I repeated, my voice rising. You call this easier? You dragged me into this mess, told Mason the baby was his. And now Ethan's saying it's not even possible? What else are you hiding, Emily? I panicked, she cried. I didn't know what to do, Jake. I didn't know who to turn to. Mason was there, and he seemed like the safest option. I let out a harsh laugh, pacing the room as my anger boiled over. So let me get this straight. You lied to him to keep him around, and now he's playing the concerned father while you're still dragging me into this. I didn't mean for it to get this complicated, she whispered. I thought I could handle it. You thought. I snapped, cutting her off. Do you ever stop to think about anyone other than yourself, Emily? About how your lies have affected me? Mason? Ethan? Hell, even the baby? There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought she might have hung up. Then, she spoke again, her voice trembling. Mason, he's not who you think he is. I froze, gripping the phone tighter. What does that mean? I demanded. Emily took a shaky breath. He's not just some guy I cheated with. He's been manipulating me. Manipulating you how? I asked, my stomach tightening. She hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. He's been holding things over my head, she said finally. He's got evidence. Things that could ruin me if they got out. What kind of evidence? I demanded, my voice sharp. Pictures. Texts. Things I sent him, she said quietly. He's been threatening to show them to people, to you if I don't keep him involved. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. You're telling me Mason's blackmailing you? Why the hell didn't you tell me this sooner? I was scared, she cried. I didn't know what to do. I thought I could keep him under control, but he's dangerous, Jake. You don't know him like I do. I pinched the bridge of my nose, trying to process this new information. So now we're dealing with a manipulative ex, a possibly fake paternity claim, and another guy who thinks he's in the running? Great. Fantastic. Jake, please, Emily said, her voice cracking. I need your help. I can't do this on my own. For the first time in weeks, I heard something in her voice that almost sounded genuine. Desperation. Fear. Maybe even regret. But it didn't erase what she'd done, or the fact that she'd dragged me into this hellscape with her lies. I don't even know where to start, Emily, I said finally. You've lied to me so many times, I don't even know what's real anymore. I know, she whispered. But I swear, Jake, this is the truth. Mason, he's not just some guy I made a mistake with. He's dangerous, and I don't know how to get out. As I hung up the phone, my head spinning, a knock at the door jolted me. I opened it to find Mason standing there, his face dark with something I couldn't quite place. We need to talk, he said, stepping inside before I could stop him. Mason stepped into my house like he owned the place, brushing past me without so much as a glance. His presence felt oppressive, like the air grew heavier the moment he crossed the threshold. He stood in the middle of the living room, his hands in his pockets, his jaw tight. "What the hell are you doing here?" I demanded, slamming the door behind me. "I didn't invite you." "I'm not here to fight, Jake," he said evenly, though his eyes betrayed something darker, calculated. "We need to clear the air." I let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, we're doing this again?" Everyone in this mess keeps showing up with more truths to share. "What's it this time, Mason? You gonna tell me you're not the father, either?" His eyes narrowed. "Funny you say that. Emily finally told you, didn't she?" "Told me what?" I shot back, stepping closer. "That you're blackmailing her? That you've been holding her mistakes over her head to keep her around?" He flinched, and for the first time, I saw his confidence waver. "She's exaggerating," he said quickly. "It's not like that." "Then what is it like, Mason?" I snapped. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been manipulating her while playing the concerned boyfriend. So why don't you drop the act and tell me what you really want?" Mason's jaw clenched, and he ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room like he was trying to figure out how to spin the situation. Finally, he stopped and faced me, his expression cold. "Fine," he said. "You want the truth? Here it is. Emily's not the victim she's pretending to be." I folded my arms, my anger simmering just below the surface. "Enlighten me." "She came to me," he said, his voice hard. "She's the one who started this whole thing. She told me she wasn't happy, that you were too busy for her, that she needed someone who actually cared. And yeah, I believed her. I thought I was doing her a favor." "A favor?" I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Sleeping with another man's wife is a favor now? You really are delusional." Mason ignored the jab, his expression darkening. But then things got messy. She started sending me things, texts, pictures, even some compromising stuff. And when I tried to pull back, she threatened to expose me. She said if I didn't stick around, she'd ruin my career. I blinked, caught off guard. "You expect me to believe that?" "Believe whatever you want," Mason said, shrugging. "But I'm not the only one lying here. Emily's been playing both of us. Hell, all of us. Ethan, you, me. None of us really know where we stand with her, do we?" My mind raced as I tried to piece together the tangled web of lies and half-truths. Could Mason be telling the truth? Was Emily really capable of manipulating all of us like this? Or was this just another one of his games? "So why are you here?" I asked finally. "What's your angle?" Mason's lips curled into a bitter smile. "I want out. I'm done being her pawn. But I need to make sure I'm not the one who takes the fall when this all blows up." "And you think I'm going to help you?" I said, laughing bitterly. "After everything you've done? I think you're as tired of this as I am," he said, his voice low. "And I think you know that if this keeps spiraling, it's going to get ugly for all of us. Especially you." My fists clenched, but I forced myself to stay calm. "What are you saying, Mason?" "I'm saying we make a deal," he said, his eyes locking onto mine. "You help me keep Emily in check, and I'll make sure the stuff I have on her never sees the light of day." I stared at him, my chest tight with rage. "You're insane if you think I'm going to team up with you." "Think about it," he said, stepping closer. "If we work together, we can stop her from dragging us down with her. Or you could try to go it alone and see how that works out." I didn't reply. My mind was spinning, caught between anger, disbelief, and the terrifying realization that Mason might actually have a point. Yes, I stood there, trying to decide whether to throw Mason out or hear him out. My phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and froze. It was Ethan. His message read, "I've just spoken to Emily. You're not going to believe what she told me." The message from Ethan stared back at me, taunting me like the final nail in a coffin I didn't want to acknowledge. "I've just spoken to Emily. You're not going to believe what she told me." I glanced up at Mason, who was watching me with a smug, expectant expression, clearly enjoying the spectacle. Without a word, I turned away and opened Ethan's text thread. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard for a second before I typed back. "What did she say?" Mason leaned against the couch, arms crossed, his voice breaking the silence. "Another revelation? You're really on a roll tonight." "Shut up, Mason," I muttered, my focus locked on my phone. The three dots popped up immediately, and Ethan's reply came through. "She told me the baby might not be yours, or mine, or even Mason's." For a second, I thought I'd read it wrong. My heart hammered in my chest as I reread the message, the words blurring together in my mind. Not mine. Not Mason's. Someone else. My grip on the phone tightened, my hands shaking. "What is it?" Mason asked, his smug demeanor faltering when he saw my face. I ignored him, my fingers flying across the keyboard as I shot back a response. "What the hell are you talking about? Who else is there?" The reply came almost instantly. She wouldn't say. Just that there's another possibility. I felt like the room was spinning. Another possibility? Who the hell was this mysterious fourth person? How deep did this rabbit hole go? "Jake!" Mason's voice broke through my haze. This time sharper, more insistent. "What did he say?" I looked at him, my jaw clenched. Apparently, there's someone else. Emily's been keeping yet another secret. Mason's eyes narrowed, his expression shifting from smug to alarmed. "Someone else? Oh, I don't know," I snapped. "But Ethan seems to think Emily's been lying to all of us. And honestly, at this point, I wouldn't be surprised if she dragged half the town into this mess." Mason cursed under his breath, pacing the room like a caged animal. "This is ridiculous. She's completely unhinged." "Yeah, well, you're not exactly the voice of reason," I shot back, the stress making my anger boil over. "You've been part of this circus from the start. And you think you're blameless?" Mason retorted, turning to face me. "You stayed with her while she was pulling all this crap. Don't act like you're some saint. Get out of my house, Mason." I growled, my patience officially gone. "I've had enough of you for one night." "Fine," he said, grabbing his jacket. "But don't come crying to me when this whole thing explodes in your face. You're gonna have to make a choice, Jake. And soon." I didn't reply. I just watched him leave, slamming the door behind him. The moment the house was quiet again, I collapsed onto the couch, my head in my hands. My mind raced, a storm of emotions I couldn't untangle. Anger, confusion, exhaustion. And beneath it all, the gnawing fear that Ethan's message was just the tip of the iceberg. The next morning, as I tried to pull myself together, my phone rang. It was Emily. Her voice was strained, frantic. "Jake," she said, "you need to meet me. I'll explain everything, but it has to be in person. It's about the other guy." Emily's voice on the phone was barely holding together, trembling like a frayed rope about to snap. "Jake, please," she said. "You need to meet me. I'll explain everything, but I can't do this over the phone. It's about the other guy." Her words hung in the air, each one slicing through me like a knife. The other guy. The phrase alone was enough to make me want to throw my phone out the window, but the urgency in her voice stopped me. "When and where?" I asked coldly, keeping my emotions in check. "There's a diner on Main," she said quickly. "I'll be there in an hour." Before I could respond, she hung up. I stared at the screen, her name still glowing like a cruel joke. Part of me wanted to ignore her, to let her twist in the mess she'd created. But I couldn't. Not when there was another layer to this nightmare waiting to be uncovered. An hour later, I walked into the diner, the bell over the door jingling as I stepped inside. Emily was already there, sitting in a corner booth, her hands wrapped tightly around a coffee mug. She looked exhausted, like the weight of everything had finally started to crush her. Good. She deserved it. I slid into the booth across from her, not bothering with pleasantries. "Start talking." Emily looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "Jake, I know I've hurt you." "Skip the apology," I interrupted. "Who's the other guy?" She flinched but nodded, taking a shaky breath. "His name is Derek. He's someone I met at work. We only—" "Cut to the chase," I snapped. "Are you telling me he's a candidate for the baby, too?" Her face crumpled, and she nodded. "Yes." I leaned back in the booth, my mind spinning. Derek. Another name. Another betrayal. "How long?" I asked, my voice ice cold. "It was just one time," she said quickly, as if that made it any better. "It didn't mean anything. I wasn't even thinking." "You weren't thinking?" I laughed bitterly. "That seems to be your excuse for everything, Emily. Do you even hear yourself?" "I know I messed up," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I've been lying to you, to Mason, to Ethan, to everyone. But I'm telling you now because I can't keep living like this." "Do you even know whose baby it is?" I asked, my voice rising. A couple of people in nearby booths glanced our way, but I didn't care. She shook her head, her tears falling faster. I don't know, Jake. That's the truth. I don't know. I let out a long, shaky breath, trying to process what she just said. For men, for possible fathers, and not a single answer. Why now? I asked finally. Why tell me this now, after all the lies? Because Derek, he found out, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He knows about the baby, and he's demanding a paternity test. My blood ran cold. So what? He's going to come out of the woodwork and stake his claim, just like Mason and Ethan? I don't know, she admitted. But he's not like them, Jake. He's complicated. Complicated how? I demanded. Emily hesitated, looking down at her coffee cup. He's married. The diner suddenly felt too small, too loud, too bright. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. So let me get this straight. You had an affair with a married man, and now he's coming after you because he thinks the baby might be his. She nodded miserably, her hands trembling. I don't know what to do. If his wife finds out, that's your problem, not mine, I said, cutting her off. You dragged yourself into this. You dragged all of us into this. Don't expect me to clean it up for you. Emily looked up at me, her eyes pleading. Jake, I know I don't deserve your help, but I don't know who else to turn to. I'm scared. Derek's wife, she's not someone you want to cross. Her words made me pause. What does that mean? She's powerful, Emily said, her voice trembling. Connected. If she finds out, she could ruin me. She could ruin all of us. I leaned back, my mind racing. This wasn't just a tangled web of lies anymore. It was a ticking time bomb. And Emily had managed to drag me right into the blast zone. Just as I opened my mouth to respond, Emily's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen, and her face went pale. Without a word, she slid the phone toward me. The message was from Derek. We need to talk. Now. My wife is starting to suspect. I stared at Emily's phone, Derek's message glaring back at me like a neon sign flashing trouble. We need to talk. Now. My wife is starting to suspect. Every word felt like another crack in the fragile ground beneath me. Emily sat across from me, her hands trembling as she pushed the phone further toward me, almost as if it burned her to touch it. Your wife is starting to suspect, I muttered, repeating Derek's words aloud. That's the mess you're dragging me into now. Emily's face crumpled, tears threatening to spill again. Jake, please. I don't know what to do. If his wife finds out, she'll ruin you? I interrupted, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Honestly, Emily, you're doing a fine job of ruining yourself. She flinched but didn't argue. Instead, she buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Normally, seeing someone cry like that would spark some kind of pity in me, but all I felt was emptiness. I'd run out of sympathy weeks ago. What does he want? I asked after a long silence, nodding toward her phone. I don't know, she whispered, her voice muffled. He's scared, I guess. His wife, she's not the forgiving type. If she finds out, his entire life falls apart. Good, I snapped. Let it. He deserves it. Emily's head shot up, her tear-streaked face full of panic. Jake, you don't understand. She's not just some angry wife. She's powerful. Like political powerful. She could bury him. And me. And you by association if she decides to lash out. I blinked, caught off guard. What are you saying? Who is this woman? Her name is Sandra, Emily said reluctantly, her voice barely above a whisper. Sandra Reed. She's a city council member. And she's got friends in all the right places. I sat back, the weight of her words sinking in. Sandra Reed. I'd heard the name before, seen her face on campaign posters plastered across town. She was one of those polished, untouchable types, the kind of person who could destroy someone's life with a single phone call. So, Derek is tangled up with a politician, I said, letting out a bitter laugh. And now you're worried she's going to turn her wrath on you? On all of us, Emily said, her voice trembling. If this gets out, she'll make sure we all pay for it. I ran a hand down my face, trying to make sense of it all. A cheating wife, 3 potential fathers, and now a vengeful politician looming in the background. This wasn't just a mess. It was a full-blown disaster. and I had no idea how to get out of it. Just as I was about to respond, Emily's phone buzzed again. Another message from Derek. I need to see you. Tonight. Don't make me come find you. My blood boiled. This guy has some nerve, I said, shoving the phone back toward her. What does he think he's going to accomplish by threatening you? I don't know, Emily whispered, her voice hollow. But he's desperate, and desperate people do stupid things. I stood up, pacing the length of the diner. My anger bubbled just below the surface, barely contained. I wanted to storm out of there, to walk away and leave Emily to clean up her own mess. But something about Derek's message, about Sandra Reed's shadow looming over everything, made it impossible to ignore. We're going to handle this, I said finally, my voice firm. Emily looked up at me, her eyes wide with surprise. You mean you'll help me? I'm not doing this for you, I said coldly. I'm doing this because I'm not letting some slimy politician's husband drag my name through the mud. But make no mistake, Emily, you brought this on yourself. She nodded, wiping her eyes with shaky hands. What do we do? I glanced at the phone on the table, Derek's words still glowing on the screen. First, we meet him. If he wants to talk, fine. Let's hear what he has to say. And then? Emily asked, her voice wavering. And then, I said, my jaw tightening, we make sure he understands one thing. If he tries to drag me into his mess, I'll take him down with me. That evening, as Emily and I pulled into the empty parking lot Derek had chosen for the meeting, a black SUV was already waiting. The moment we stepped out of the car, the SUV's door opened and Derek emerged, followed by a woman I immediately recognized. Sandra Reed. The chill of the evening air hit me as I stepped out of the car, but it was nothing compared to the ice in my veins as I saw her. Sandra Reed. She was even more imposing in person than she appeared on her campaign posters. Tall, impeccably dressed, with sharp features that seemed to cut through the dim light of the parking lot. Her expression was unreadable, but her presence alone screamed control, authority, and danger. Derek followed behind her, looking like a man walking to his own execution. His shoulders were hunched, his hands stuffed in his pockets, and he wouldn't meet my eyes. Emily stood frozen beside me, her hand gripping the car door like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Sandra's eyes scanned us, her gaze lingering on Emily for a moment before settling on me. So, she said, her voice low and measured, you're the husband. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to keep my cool. And you must be Sandra. Funny, I don't remember inviting you to this conversation. Her lips twitched into a faint, humorless smile. Derek told me everything, she said, her tone calm but laced with steel, including the fact that my name is being dragged into this circus. So, I thought it was time I stepped in. This isn't about you, I said sharply, taking a step forward. This is between Emily and Derek. No, Sandra said, her voice slicing through the air like a blade. This is about all of us now. My husband made some very stupid choices, and I intend to make sure those choices don't ruin my career or my life. Derek flinched but said nothing, his head hanging like a scolded child. Emily looked like she might faint. I, on the other hand, felt my anger boiling over. With all due respect, I said, my voice tight, you don't get to show up here and act like the victim. Your husband made his choices. Emily made hers, and I'm the one stuck cleaning up the mess. Sandra's expression didn't falter. I'm here because I know how to clean up messes, Jake. And trust me, this is one you don't want to handle alone. I narrowed my eyes at her. What's that supposed to mean? It means, she said, taking a step closer, that if this situation escalates, if word of this gets out, it won't just ruin Derek. It'll ruin you too. Your name will be dragged through the mud right alongside his and Emily's. And believe me, I have the resources to ensure that happens. Are you threatening me? I asked, my voice low and dangerous. I'm giving you an opportunity, Sandra replied smoothly. An opportunity to walk away from this without your life being destroyed. I let out a bitter laugh. Walk away? From what? My wife's betrayal? The fact that there are 4 potential fathers for this baby, and no one seems to have a clue who it belongs to. Sandra's calm facade cracked slightly, her eyes narrowing. 4, she repeated, glancing at Derek. He told me there were two. Of course he did, I said, glaring at Derek. Because why tell the whole truth when you can tell just enough to save your skin? Sandra turned to Derek, her expression darkening. How many other secrets are you keeping from me? She asked coldly. I didn't think it mattered, Derek muttered, avoiding her gaze. It matters, she snapped, her voice sharp enough to make him flinch. Every detail matters. Maybe if you two worked out your issues before you started chasing other women, we wouldn't even be here, I said, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. Sandra's eyes snapped back to me, but instead of anger, I saw something else, recognition. You're angry, she said softly. I get that, but anger isn't going to fix this. Then what will? I shot back, because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're just trying to cover your own tracks. I'm trying to contain the damage, Sandra said. For all of us, including you. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, no one spoke. The weight of everything pressed down on me. The lies, the betrayals, the secrets that seemed to multiply every time I thought I'd reach the bottom. What do you want? I asked finally, my voice tired. Sandra took a deep breath. I want this to go away. Quietly. No scandals. No lawsuits. No paternity battles. Just silence. And how do you plan to make that happen? I asked, crossing my arms. I've already spoken to my lawyers, Sandra said. They've advised me on how to handle this. Derek and I will provide financial support for the child if it turns out to be his. But if it's not, this conversation never happened. My jaw tightened. And if it is? Then we'll figure it out, Sandra said, her voice calm but firm. But until we know for sure, I expect everyone involved to keep their mouths shut. Understood? Her eyes swept over the group, daring anyone to challenge her. Emily looked like she wanted to sink into the ground. Derek nodded meekly, avoiding his wife's gaze. And me? I didn't trust her. Not one bit. As Sandra turned to leave, she stopped and looked back at me. One more thing, she said. You should know, if the child is Derek's, I have no intention of letting Emily anywhere near my family.